September 2015. The United Nations Broadband Commission released a report with guidelines on how to stop cyber violence against women. The phrase online violence is a contradiction in terms, as was pointed out by the WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange. The report seemed to show blatant disregard for the dictionary definition of the word violence, and seemingly redefined it to include such dastardly deeds as typing on the internet. Time magazine's analysis of the report ran with the headline,
UN says cyber violence is equivalent to physical violence against women.
Yes, both the UN and Time magazine are actually claiming that saying mean things such as you suck or you're a liar to grown women is just as bad as throwing acid in girls' faces or female genital mutilation of young girls. Obviously, these claims that put criticism of women on the same level as physical violence are so ridiculous that it's not even worth touching. However, another claim in the report was that it was actually violent video games that creates this culture of violence. The report specifically said that violent video games are turning children, mostly boys, into killing zombies, and that they are also part of mainstreaming violence. The citation for this claim was a report from the year 2000, which is quoted,
"We're getting killings which are caused by the use of Nintendo-style games, such as the game Pokemon, with children and also with police and others. In the case of the Diallo shooting, the problem was that the mayor of New York, like many other officials, has been training the police force in Nintendo-style killing techniques, so we have Nintendo killers."
But what do actual games research academics think of all this? Meet Constance Steinkuhler, the very first educational game czar and co-director of the Games Learning Society Research Group. Her official title at the White House was Senior Policy Analyst at the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and she worked an 18-month term in the White House directly under John Holdren, starting in 2011. Her bio at her university reads,
She has published over 20 peer-reviewed publications on games and learning, 3 edited books, 3 special issues of peer-reviewed academic journals focused on the intellectual life of games, and the 2009 National Academies of Science report entitled Learning Science: Computer Games, Simulations, and Education.
She was chosen by the president to be the highest ranking, most prestigious, and arguably most powerful games researcher in the world. Being that she was handpicked by the president to be the nation's first games academic working for the White House, her opinion on whether violent video games cause people to become violent in real life should hold some weight. An online progressive news site interviewed her in 2014. They asked, "What about concerns about violence and sexism in popular games? How much of a problem is that?" Her answer?
It's interesting and unfortunate that even though the games industry and game production is really diverse, there's still sort of this misunderstanding that all games are first-person shooters and women with really huge, ample chests. I know this really well, not because I study violence, but because after Sandy Hook, I briefed the vice president personally and coordinated meetings with the video game industry and researchers in the subject area that is part of the listening tour he did for giving policy advice to the president on gun violence. First and foremost, the data linking video games to violence is tenuous at best. There is just not an empirical basis for that claim. That said, the video game industry has a PR problem. The fact that for many of us, especially moms, that when we think of video games, we think of violent, misogynistic themes and stuff that's not appropriate for kids. I think that's a problem. There are things that the industry could and should do to address some of those issues, and I would love to see them take on.
Oh, so she completely rejects the idea of violent video games causing violence and boils it down to nothing but a PR problem. Apparently, parents wrongly assume that all games are not suitable for kids. But after her 18-month term was up, who took her place? A man named Mark Delora. An article interviewing him in 2015 titled, "Is the Government Finally Over Video Game Violence?" reads,
Industry veteran Mark Delora, who was appointed to the position of Senior Advisor for Digital Media at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy just a few months after the Biden meeting, backed up the notion that actually, no, the government really isn't looking to target violent video games. One of the big concerns was the common perception in the public at large that games might result in some sort of violent behavior. Therefore, we should bring people in and have a discussion around it to see if there's any merit to it. I think the perception of having a meeting like that leads people to think that there's an actual problem. The way Delora sees it is that the problem was more about perception and the game industry's fear that government still had plans to act. Indeed, now rather than worrying about Grand Theft Auto or Call of Duty, the White House is more interested in pursuing the positive impact that games can have.
So 2 of the highest ranking games academics in the country who worked at the White House claim that violence in games is a non-issue. And what does another leading games academic have to say about this? Dr. Mimi Ito, the research director of the Digital Media and Learning Hub at UC Irvine and chair of the MacArthur Research Network on Connected Learning, claims in her 2010 book,
Despite very little empirical evidence that games lead to antisocial or violent behavior, popular perception persists in painting a picture of the aggressive, isolated, compulsive gamer.
the question we are now presented with is this: why didn't the UN Broadband Commission ask any of the world's top games academics what the research says about violence in video games? And why did they choose to instead rely upon a non-academic article from the year 2000 which claims that Nintendo of America manufactures Pokemon, Game Boys, and equipment for satanic games?